I'll call this meeting of the Plan Commission to order. Madam Secretary, when you're ready, if we could have a roll call, please.
Mr. Ackerson? Ms. Billman? Here. Mr. Fell?
Here.
Mr. Fitch?
Here.
Mr. Hopkins?
Here.
Ms. Wadrago? Mr. Turner?
Here.
Mr. Weisskopf? And Ms. Yu?
Here.
We do have a quorum. Are there any changes to the agenda? The minutes from the December 6, 2018 Plan Commission meeting. Any motions or such? Mr. Hopkins?
I move the minutes be approved.
Motion by Mr. Hopkins, second by Ms. Billman. Any changes to the minutes? Do this by a voice vote. All those in favor of approving the minutes say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? The minutes are approved. Now, do we have any communications? I will point out that city staff passed out some changes to the second case we're going to consider tonight, and we'll touch on those more when we get there. The continued public hearing, an application by the zoning administrator to amend the zoning ordinance with changes to Article 2, Article 5, Article 6, and other sections to facilitate solar energy system installation. This is continued to the January 24th, 2019 regular meeting. We don't have any old business. New public hearings. Plan case 2354M18, a request by the City of Urbana to rezone 3 parcels totaling .653 acres at 502 to 504 South Broadway Avenue and 202 East California Avenue from R4 medium-density multifamily and R6 high-density multifamily to B4 Central Business Zoning District.
Let's try that way. Okay.
Mr.
Six
Garcia.
times a charm, as they say. Okay, good evening. Okay, so this is a request by the zoning administrator to rezone 3 city-owned parcels. And these are on South Broadway Avenue, are 2 of the parcels, and then one of the parcels is on California Avenue. You can see that in Exhibit A in your packet. So 2 over here on Broadway and Illinois, and then 1 down here on California. As you can see, those parcels, as well as the adjacent, also city-owned parcels here and here, are all owned by the city and are parking lots. Currently, the parcels on Broadway are zoned R6, which is high-density multiple-family residential, and the parcel on East California is zoned R4, medium-density multiple-family residential. Those are really holdovers from the uses that used to be on those sites. Well, there used to be multifamily here on California, and there used to be, I believe there were some old houses that may have been converted to apartments here on these parcels, but those have all been gone for some number of years. The City of Urbana and Bryn Shore Development are working together on a development to redevelop all of these city-owned parcels, so all of those parking lot parcels, into an art-centered affordable housing development, and then rezoning these parcels to B4 it would match the zoning of the surrounding city-owned parcels. It would match the recommended land uses from the comprehensive plan, and it would also make the proposed development a little bit easier to do. So the proposed project would include an apartment building with 6 live-work units for artists, sort of along Illinois Street here. There would be apartments on the 2nd and 3rd floor of that building. And there would be an arts and cultural center on the east side, some green space over there, and then 9 tiny homes are proposed for the east side and for the parcel on California Avenue. In terms of the rezoning criteria, I'll go through these with a relative quickness. So the first rezoning criteria is on page 2 if you're following along in your memos. So that is deals with the existing land uses and the zoning of the nearby property. So rezoning to B4 would be compatible with the zoning and land uses of the surrounding area. To the north, you have Lincoln Square Mall. To the west, south, and east, you have business and residential uses. Criterion number 2 is the extent to which property values are diminished by the restrictions of the ordinance. It's uncertain whether surrounding property values would be affected at all by the change in rezoning, but it is unlikely that the rezoning would diminish the value of the surrounding properties. The rezoning would make it more likely that the parcels are redeveloped in some way, even if the current proposed development didn't happen. The rezoning would make them more likely to be redeveloped in the future, which might increase the nearby property values. Number 3 is the extent to which the ordinance promotes the health, safety, morals, or general welfare of the public. And for that criterion, the proposed rezoning would not harm the health, safety, morals, or general welfare of the public. Number 4, the relative gain to the public as compared to the hardship imposed on the individual property owner. So the rezoning would allow for the potential for the proposed arts center, which would be beneficial to the public. In addition, the B4 district would make more affordable housing more likely on these parcels, since the B4 district is a little bit more flexible with respect to the development regulations, and more affordable housing units would be beneficial to the public. Number 5 is the suitability of the subject property for the zone purposes. These properties are all well suited for the uses in the B4 district, central business type uses. That district is highly appropriate, and the future land use designations in the 2005 comprehensive plan reflect that. Furthermore, if the proposed redevelopment takes place, the artist spaces, residences, and arts center would be highly compatible with the surrounding area. Number 6 is the length of time the property has been vacant as zoned, considered in the context of land development in the area in the vicinity of the subject property. So as I mentioned, the parcel on East California has been a parking lot since the 70s or 80s. And then the parcels on Broadway did have those units on there, but have been vacant for at least 7 years. So rezoning to B4 would make them more likely to be redeveloped into a productive use. Number 7 is the community's need for more of the proposed use. So the comprehensive plan talks about the need for to provide more affordable housing as one of its goals, and that sentiment has been echoed during recent community discussions of proposed developments. The comp plan also includes an objective to expand the city's creative community by promoting arts-related uses and events. And the proposed rezoning would support a development that would contribute to each of these goals and objectives. City staff also consistently are told that Urbana needs more affordable housing and more space for artists. So a dedicated space for an arts and cultural center would be a welcome addition to downtown Urbana. And finally, number 8, the care with which the community has planned its land use development. Again, in the 2005 comprehensive plan, these parcels were identified as central business, even though at the time some of the parcels were used for housing and parking, but it was recognized that in the future they'd best be used for central business type uses. Before I wrap up, I did want to point out, I forgot to mention it earlier, is that the proposed apartment uses and the proposed tiny homes would be allowed under the current zoning, but having an art center mixed in there and then having these sort of live-work artist spaces would be allowed by right in the B4 district. So that's one reason for the rezoning. Okay, so that wraps up my, my report. So in conclusion, the Plan Commission has the following options in this case. You can forward the case to City Council with a recommendation to approve the request, or you can forward the case to City Council with a recommendation to deny the request. This was proposed by staff, so the staff recommendation, as you can imagine, is to approve the proposed rezonings. I'll take any questions if you have them.
Thank you, Mr. Garcia. Mr. Hopkins?
In part of the description, the tiny homes are described as single-family. Single-family is not permitted by right or conditional or special use in B4. Can you explain this to me?
Yes, since they would be, it would be multiple units on one lot, so we would consider that multifamily. So it'd be, you know, if you have 5 tiny homes on one lot, that would be considered multifamily.
So we use the more of the building code and the layman's term for single family so that people would understand that it would be an individual dwelling unit. But
So
several of
this
those on
is-
one lot makes it, from a zoning perspective, multifamily, as Kevin mentioned.
Okay, so these are detached.
Mr.
You
Fell?
might want to
Oh, sorry,
clarify
Mr.
that at
Mr.
some
Hopkins.
point.
Mr. Fell?
I'm going to follow up a little bit, and I don't know if we know how big are these tiny homes?
All we've seen so far is a conceptual site plan.
Okay.
I think 450 to 500.
Have they talked
remembering
to
off the top
building
of my head.
safety about tiny homes?
Not at any detailed level, but
Okay.
certainly,
The current
obviously,
building code
they
in
would,
force does not allow a tiny home.
I think they've had preliminary discussions,
Okay.
so
Just
perhaps we got our
I just want to
numbers
make sure
wrong.
down the road that doesn't become an issue.
They would need to meet the building code, yes.
Okay. Additional questions. The next 2 lots to the east on California is where the cleaners are, correct?
On the very corner.
I think on Illinois.
No, on
On-
California, to
On
the east of
California.
the lot that we're talking about. No, here.
That's the car dealership.
There's 2,
That's already-
I think there's 2 multifamily
Yeah,
units there.
The cleaners on Illinois.
Okay, all right. Okay, that takes care of that question. This question is, you may or may not know, are we going to revisit what's going to happen with this alley now that this development is going to contain both sides of it? Are we anticipating them a request to vacate part of this alley? Okay.
I'm not sure at this time, but I don't know if that's germane to the rezoning discussion.
It hasn't come up in my preliminary discussions,
Okay.
no.
That's it.
Ms. Billman?
I have a question about number 5 of LaSalle criteria. This says that specifically the lower density single-family units would be sited along California Avenue. Is there a way that we can be sure that that's what's going to happen? Could we put a condition on it? So that it might be designed some other way.
No, what's up for discussion now is just the rezoning, so it's just rezoning to B4 and whatever is allowed under that.
I'll, just to take a step back, I'll remind everyone, since these are city-owned properties, that the city would have a strong interest in how they are constructed and before we would enter into a transaction for the property.
Thank you.
Mr. Fell.
I'm going to follow up on the last question, just as a point of, can we do this? If the commission is under the opinion that the tiny homes should go along California Avenue, we can do that under the current zoning, correct? Is it part of, I just want to know, is it part of our option to rezone part of this, one of these parcels and not the other? Or is this an all or nothing case?
I suppose you could rezone some, but not all of the parcels. But, I mean, part of the rezoning is to match with the comprehensive plan, future land use designation. So, I mean, as you're all aware, we've been doing sort of a cleanup of a lot of the parcels downtown that were identified as central business zoning, but we just had not rezoned those yet. So we've sort of been doing a series of these in the past year just to do a bit of cleanup.
Again, I'm not saying that's something we would want to do. I'm just wondering if it's an option. So sort of as a follow-up to your point, why are we not also considering the 2 lots I just asked about where apparently there are apartment buildings that are zoned R4, which we could rezone, and then we would not have a little island of zoning there. Isn't that what we want to avoid? And it doesn't really hurt their property if we also rezone it.
Well, those are owned by, those are not owned by the city. So we could certainly approach the property owners and see if they'd be willing to rezone. But I think right now they're higher density apartments.
I just
so-
asked because part of, if we reverse engineer this, we never want to spot zone a piece of property, and we're reverse engineering spot zoning a piece of property here. We're okay with that? City's okay with that?
Well, I don't think I'd
Apparently.
consider this spot zoning.
Could you go back
Yeah.
to the zoning map, Kevin? So,
If
it is.
if we
con-
carry this case through, the only piece of property zoned R4, and then all along there is where that is where these apartment buildings are.
Right, that's an existing zoning. I think it would be
B4.
different discussion if we were looking, if those were zoned something else, and then we went ahead as a city and said, we're going to zone you R4. So it's different if it's just you're leaving existing zoning in place versus, imposing a different zoning. Just to take a step back on the previous question, if I may, one of the other implications of zoning to B4 is the lack of a parking requirement. And as many of you are probably aware, it is common that an affordable housing development would not have as much of a need for parking as perhaps a market rate development. And you may also be aware of the lot of parking that is immediately adjacent to this area. And so rezoning it to B4 would lessen the parking requirement for the property as well.
Any further questions for Mr. Garcia? Oh, thank you very much.
Thanks.
All right, I'll remind everybody of the procedures for public input. We will now allow anyone who wants to speak in favor of the proposal to address the commission. Following that, we will please welcome anyone who wants to be opposed to the proposal will address the commission, and then we may bring city staff back if there's additional information that we need. Then we'll close the public input, discuss, and possibly vote. So, sir, if you could state your name and sign the paper, that would be great.
My name is Steve Beckett. I live at 1794 Errol Place in Urbana, rural Urbana. My wife, Barbara, and I are trustees of Beckett Property Trust and the beneficial owners of the property at 508 South Broadway, which is at the corner of Broadway and California. So we're the property that is immediately east of the California, 202 California location of that lot, and then we're immediately south of the Broadway properties that are part of this. We've owned this property since 1991. It's a professional building. It was, before we bought it, it was the Illinois Crop Improvement Association. I guess I should speak into this. It was the Illinois Crop Improvement Association. It's a professional building. We have a parking lot that is on the east side or rear part of our property, and a rear entrance where we get deliveries and things like that. So I support the concept of the rezoning so that the adjacent properties to our property are all zoned the same. To me, it is an appropriate place for commercial development. The only thing I'm sort of leery about is this tiny houses thing, because I'm not sure that the uses are compatible. I heard some questions tonight about parking. heard about the alley. There's an alley on the north side of our property, which is, a public alley. That's access to our parking lot on the backside. So this is more talking about the development than it is the rezoning. But I would just want to make sure that we're aware of that. Obviously, that would hurt our use tremendously if something happened to that alley. It was vacated in some way so that we wouldn't have access to it. So that's a concern that I have. The second is, we have this thing in Urbana. I'm an Urbana boy, by the way. I've been around for 70 years. We have this thing called the Farmers Market. And from May to November, I'm sure you've been there. You see what it's like. You see where the parking is. We're good neighbors. People use our parking lot too, and there's heavy use of our parking lot because that's very busy. And this development is going to directly impact those farmers markets. So in planning this and in working with the developers, obviously that's something that needs to be taken into account. And then obviously we're concerned about property values as well. We have the high school kids who, when they get out of school, come back, and others who walk through our property all the time. And just about every morning I get to pick up whiskey bottles and beer bottles. I'm not saying that's the high school kids, by the way. Whiskey bottles and beer cans and things like that, just because of the public traffic that sort of goes from the residential towards, downtown Urbana or back from downtown Urbana away. So I'm just concerned about it. I'm concerned a little bit about the development. But we are good neighbors. We do want Urbana to develop. We are interested in the use, and we support the rezoning. We think it makes sense for the overall development of the property. It is a strange configuration, I will say that. And the other thing I'm concerned about is Mr. Garcia has been very nice to communicate with me recently, but nobody ever talked to us about this development. And we're right there. Nobody has ever talked to us about the development. We want to be good neighbors.
Any questions for Mr. Beckett?
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Anyone else wish to speak in favor of this proposal? Does anybody wish to address the commission opposed to the proposal? Take your time.
I have one time.
And if you could state your name and
Sure.
sign the paper for the
Okay.
minutes.
Yes. Okay. My name's Marlene Book, and I live at 107 East California. And I have many of the concerns of Mr. Beckett, but I do not understand how you can put 44 units, which the letter that, when I got the website and I printed it off, it said there would be 44 units on that property. And I just don't see that 44 units is a possibility. And parking is a real concern. When we had Lincoln Square, you put up 2-hour parking signs, which we still have on Walnut and on Broadway. And I'm very concerned about that. I do not believe that it won't impact the property values. I've lived in that house for 61 years, and I hope to die in that house, frankly. So, I'm just very concerned about it. And yes, I do believe we need affordable housing. However, I did check, and Urbana's, I believe, vacancy rate is now about 13%. So surely market forces would bring down the price of some of this housing. Maybe not. Maybe they have big mortgages. But as I say, I am concerned. I'd kind of like our peaceful neighborhood to stay that way. And I need to sign my name.
Thank you. Any questions for Ms. Book? Now, is your impression that, and again, this is not about the development itself, it's about the zoning.
I realize that.
Yeah,
I
but your
realize
questions
the
are valid,
zoning.
yeah.
But I realize by rezoning it, that the parking issue would
Yeah,
become
you're
a big
correct.
problem.
But, I mean, is the proposal is not to put 45 units on California?
No, it's to
The
put
whole-
45 units
Yeah, the whole thing.
on the
yeah,
whole
okay,
thing. And that's a lot of people.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify that.
Okay,
That's-
yeah, I realize
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
Okay,
Okay,
okay.
all right.
As I say, that's the only reason I would oppose the rezoning. And yes, it probably was a good idea, except it would impact the whole area a great deal. It's already a fragile neighborhood.
All right, no further questions? Thank you very much for your
Okay.
concerns.
I'm not sure I can get up, so.
Okay, well, yeah.
Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you. Anyone else wish to address the Plan Commission on this case? City staff, do you have any last words? Parting words, maybe. In that case, we'll close the public input session, and we will go into discussion. Any thoughts on this? Huh. Mr. Hopkins?
I'm inclined to consider the idea of rezoning only the 2 parcels on Broadway. And from what I understand, that ought to be sufficient to enable the project to go forward. One of its effects would be to retain parking requirements for anything built on California. And I, like Mr. Beckett, have been known to park in this area on Saturday mornings, having threaded my way through the alley past the telephone pole. And so I understand that it's reasonable that we're going to lose a significant portion of parking. But I'm looking for some compromise, I guess, and that would be of interest to me to do that.
Any thoughts on that? Mr. Fell? Ms. Billman?
I also think that perhaps the city is being too optimistic about the low need for parking. In that area, so I agree with Mr. Hopkins, that if we kept the California area, if we don't rezone it, then we would keep the requirement for parking. Did that make sense?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, it did.
Another question. I'm confused. Will that alley be vacated?
There has been no request to vacate the alley. There has been no conversation with me, anyway, in terms of talking about the development, about vacation of the alley. There are people that take access from the alley, and the development proposes also to take access from the alley.
Okay. Thank you.
Any further thoughts? So if we were to follow Mr. Hopkins, Ms. Billman's advice on this, how would the motion proceed? I guess we would move to accept the recommendation for approval for, 502 and 504 South Broadway, but not to accept the recommendation for 202 East California. Mr. Fell?
Question for staff. Is this, again, I realize this is a rezoning case, but is this developer, do we anticipate him coming in for a PUD for this project, or are we going, is he planning to build by right?
It would be by right.
Okay.
All right. Anything further? I would be inclined to support a motion that I described.
I'm going to voice discussion as a person that does this kind of work. the developer, if he is sympathetic may not be the right word. If he pays attention like I think we all hope he does, parking not an issue on this lot. We obviously cannot, we have no jurisdiction to govern at this point how this lot gets developed. If he, as an architect, if I was given this lot with the zoning that we're about to rezone it to,
Which part of the lot?
the California lot.
California lot.
California lot. I believe what I would do would make everyone happy with the parking situation, just how, by nature, how we would want to develop this parcel of ground. We cannot guarantee that this developer is going to do that, because he may not be motivated by the same things I'm motivated with. So I think I'm tending to support Lou's idea of not rezoning the lot along California, because we have no guarantees that the developer is going to do what is in the best interest of the community and not the developer.
Yeah. Any thoughts on that, Mr. Hopkins?
So I would also reiterate that this is a zoning case,
Yes.
and some of us have been on this commission too long, and are aware that we have twice considered rezonings of the parcel just north of us with imminent
Yes.
proposals in hand, neither of which has come to fruition, and it may actually be three, I may be forgetting. And so I think we should remind ourselves to focus on this as a zoning change, not a development proposal, which reinforces what Mr. Fell has just said. But I want to reinforce that point. Yes, enough said.
Okay.
I would make a motion to send Plan Case 2354 M18 to City Council with a recommendation of approval to an amended motion which deletes the last South Broadway, no wait, which deletes and 202 East California Avenue. The last one,
Everything
two,
after the
three,
word,
4, 5
Broadway Avenue.
words.
Would you want to recommend approval of those addresses and denial of the other address, just so that you are...
More on record.
Oh, okay. If that's cleaner, that's fine with me.
Well, I just feel then that way City Council can know what your recommendation is, not just you.
Okay, so it's still, yeah, okay. So
Rephrase?
rephrase to approval of 502, 504 South Broadway and denial of 202 East California Avenue.
Motion by Mr. Hopkins. Do we have a second? Second by Ms. Billman. Any further discussion? If we can have a roll call vote when you're ready.
Ms. Spelman.
Yes.
Mr. Fell. Yes. Mr. Fitch.
Yes?
Mr. Hopkins. Mr. Turner.
Yes.
Ms. Yu.
Yes.
That motion passes. Do we know a council date?
Tuesday, February 22nd. Sorry. Keep
Tuesday,
getting my
January
months mixed up.
22nd.
January
City
22nd.
Council.
Yeah, the Monday is a holiday.
Great. Thank you very much. And now, our next case is Plan Case 2363 SU18, a request by Emulsa Coat for a special use permit to expand a polymer manufacturing and storage facility at 1001 Saline Court in the IN2 Heavy Industrial District. Mr. Garcia again.
Greetings again. Okay. I'll just pull these up for now. Okay. Okay, so in 2005, Emulsicoat was issued a special use permit to build their current facility, which is at 1001 Saline Court. And at that facility, they blend, store, and distribute liquid asphalt, tar, and emulsion materials, which are mostly used in road paving products. Emulsicoat would now like to expand their facility, and so they have requested a new special use permit. The activities and operations would be the same as what's on their, or at their existing facility. It would just be a larger operation. So as you can see in this location map, the 3 parcels that we're talking about are up on Saline Court, which is off of North Lincoln Avenue, which you can see here. So here's the existing Emulsicoat facility. They've recently purchased this property, and so the expansion would take place in this area. You can see the site plan in more detail on the second page of Exhibit E. So let me actually go to Exhibit E since we're talking about it. Okay. All right, so the existing site plan, north is to the right on your screens. So as you can see, here's Saline Court. It currently dead ends. Emulsicoat is in discussions with the person who is responsible for extending Saline Court when the time is necessary. So right now, the entrance is just here off Saline Court. You'll see that there's internal circulation throughout the site. There are a series of tanks where they mix and store the materials. There are truck scales. I could zoom in a little bit. That'll make it easier. There are truck scales over here. So, drive in, mix the stuff, get the stuff, go on the scales, and exit the site. Those are not technical terms. That's just a planner trying to describe it. Okay, the proposal, let me go to the second page of Exhibit E. So on the proposal, you see the existing site. You see Saline Court being extended. There would be access off of that extended Saline Court. You'd have additional truck scales. You'd have more internal circulation. You'd have, or they'd have more mixing and storage tanks, and building here, which would support their operations. So back to...
Could you orient us on this map? I'm having trouble
Yeah,
figuring
I'm
out which
sorry.
way's north.
Okay, north is to the right. So
That's what I thought, but
yeah.
I'm trying to...
Yeah. It's just the site is more, well, because there we go.
There we
okay.
go. Much better.
North is now where most people think of north. Okay. So the surrounding area is mostly heavy industry and agriculture. As you can see to the west, there are many rail lines and rail spurs that come down and serve Emulsicoat and serve other industrial users in the area. Champaign is just to the west across those train tracks. Okay. So as I mentioned, the proposed use would be to expand their existing asphalt blending, storage, and distribution facility. And I did want to point out these operations are pretty closely monitored by the Illinois EPA. So they require operating permits for these facilities, and then EPA monitors what they do. Okay, let's see. I'm just going to move on to the requirements for the special use permit, starting on page 2 of your memo. The first one is that the proposed use is conducive to the public convenience at this location. If we go back to the existing land use map, and let me orient that properly. Okay, so you'll see the site is very close to Olympian Drive. From Olympian, you can access I-57. It's not far north of I-74, so it's got convenient access to both of those. As I mentioned, the surrounding area, and as you can see in the zoning map, the surrounding area is heavy industry, both in Urbana and in Champaign, and the railroads are actually in the county. And then you have agricultural uses to the east and to the north, or agricultural zones to the east and north. The area is highly developed with heavy industrial uses. There is an asphalt recycling facility, construction materials recycling facility. There are several concrete facilities in the area. There's a waste transfer station just south of the site. Criterion number 2 is that the use is designed, located, and proposed to be operated so that it will not be unreasonably injurious or to the public welfare. So the expansion of this facility would not be injurious to the public at this location. Again, it's highly suitable for industrial uses. It's identified as such in the comprehensive plan and in the zoning map. It's, again, close to interstates and has direct rail access for deliveries. It would also allow the transfer of some of Emulsicoat's operations, which currently take place up on University Avenue, which is near residential areas, and move them to this more highly industrialized area. The existing facility is surrounded by a landscaped berm. So looking at it from the east, you see the berm with its landscaping, and that provides screening and also containment if there are ever any spills. And the site planners have indicated that they would add a berm to a part of the site, and staff would recommend that installing a berm on the east and north sides be included as a condition if the special use permit is granted. That's one of the slight changes that we're recommending in that page that I passed out before the meeting. Finally, the third criteria is that the proposed use conforms to the applicable regulations and standards of and preserves the character of the district in which it's located. So the character of the IN2 heavy industrial district would be preserved with the proposed special use. All applicable development regulations must be met prior to construction and operation of the expanded facility, and the development would conform to those regulations. So you have the following options in this case. You can make a recommendation to the City Council to recommend approval of the special use permit with no conditions, recommend approval of the special use permit with conditions deemed appropriate, or you can recommend denial of the special use permit. Staff recommends that the Plan Commission forward this case to the City Council to recommend approval with the following conditions, or the following revised conditions, which I passed out earlier. I'm actually going to throw those up here, so just so that folks following at home can see what those revised conditions are, in case they're following along with their memo. So the revised conditions, number 1 would be the same, that the development is constructed in general conformance with the attached proposed site plan for special use permit. Number 2 is that a landscape berm shall be installed on the eastern and northern sides of the expanded site. That's because, as I pointed out, on the west side of the site are those rail lines which they need to have access to. So saying that the berm should be around the site doesn't really make sense. And let's see, number 3 is that the activities allowed by the special use permit are limited to those described in the attached special use activities. So after consulting with Emulsicoat, they provided us with a list of all of the activities that you see on the bottom half of your sheet there. So that really describes in detail what their activities are beyond what was in the initial condition. And then number 4, which is the same as in your memo, is that all required Illinois EPA permits must be obtained prior to the development of the site. The consulting engineer is here. Also, the representative from Amalsacote is here if you have questions about, more about their operations and such. But I can answer any question you have.
Great, thank you. Any questions for Mr. Garcia? Mr. Hopkins?
The extension of the sailing court. Sailing court is a Urbana city street, correct?
It is.
And the subdivision approval that has already occurred includes this extension, as I recall.
That's correct.
Okay. Are we anywhere near the limit on a dead-end street? Do we know?
I'm not sure. You mean
Okay.
the maximum
Right.
length it could
It-
be?
It doesn't matter. I mean, it's a curiosity of how
Yeah.
we're going to eventually service this northern site, but it doesn't matter.
Yeah. Mr. Fell?
The recommended condition of the berm, is that an aesthetic consideration?
Yeah, I think, well, the existing berm does a few things. It's for aesthetics, for screening, provides some landscaping, and then also, I think if if you go for a drive in the country and you see places that have storage tanks, often you'll see just little berms for containment around the storage tank. And this is sort of a berm at the edge of the site, which I think is probably more aesthetically pleasing.
I guess what I'm driving at, is this berm also part of the EPA requirement? Is it redundant, I guess, is part of my question.
Yeah, that's a question
And
better suited to
sort of
somebody
as
else.
a follow-up, I mean, while I don't disagree that a berm for aesthetic reasons isn't a valid thing to do, this is plopped right in the middle of an industrial area where, I don't want to say we don't care, but it's in a way, I'm hesitant at least to say we're going to require a berm on the north side of the site purely for an aesthetic reason, when if this business wants to expand, they have to rip the berm down. So I'm more inclined, I think, that if it's not a requirement, if it's a purely an aesthetic requirement to put this berm in, I think we may want to discuss that a little bit. So the gist of my question is, why is that there? Is it aesthetic reason? That's one thing. If it's a EPA containment reason, that's another thing.
I'm not sure right now, but we can find that out before we go to council.
Any further questions for Mr. Garcia? Nope. Well, thank you. Now, again, to remind you of the procedures for public input, now the petitioner may address the Plan Commission if you so desire. Following that, any proponents of the proposal can address the Plan Commission. And then after that, any opponents of the proposal can address us, and then the petitioner will get the last word. So if you wish to step forward and state your name and sign the sign-in sheet for the minutes, that would be great.
Yes, my name is Michael C. Friend. I'm an engineering manager with Farnsworth Group, and we're the ones that are providing the design for Amalsacote for this facility. So, I guess there was some good questions with respect to the berm. You're correct that there are secondary containment requirements for the facility. The regulatory climate for a facility like this is pretty intense, and so the secondary containment requirements. I'm not going to get deep into the weeds on the math, but there's a requirement to contain spills at the facility, and so the berm could be a dual purpose from that standpoint. There was also just the desire to respect landscape screening and be sensitive to neighbors to the north and to the east. And there's an existing berm at the facility now, so that was something that didn't seem onerous to us. We did talk with Mr. Garcia after the draft came out for the recommended conditions, and talked about the the need for a landscaping berm on the westerly side adjacent to the tracks. And so there is a need for access there, but, you know, the site design and the site grades, which is something that, you know, presuming approval here and with the city council, then when we go to the point where we present the facility site plan to Public Works, all the secondary containment comps, all of that data would, you know, we would speak with them, and also with respect to the stormwater management and all the other items that are on that list. So, so the berm does serve a couple of purposes, but there was sensitivity to the fact that it's an industrial facility, and to the north and to the east, there could be visibility. So,
Any questions? Nope. All right. Well, thank you
Yep.
very much.
yes, thank you.
Anyone else care to address the Plan Commission on this case? Well, thank you. In that case, I'll close the public input portion of the meeting, the hearing, and we'll go to discussion. Any discussion, Mr. Fell?
Well, I'll bring up my discussion point of, it seems like the only discussion point is that the berm, they're okay doing the berm, and it kind of serves dual purposes. To me, it's kind of redundant to leave it in if EPA sort of requires it anyway, but I'm good with it if they're going to leave it in. So.
Anything else?
I wondered if there's an odor associated with this plant?
Sure. I mean, TARS doesn't smell very good, but
Yeah.
it's pretty far away from.
Well, there are at least 7 single-family residential properties shown on this map, so I wondered.
Sir.
You want me to state my name?
Yes,
Rick
please.
Byers, Vice President of Emulsicoat. I think you're all aware, we have the facility right across the road here, 705 East University.
Yeah.
Saline Court was built in 2005 to move we were suggested or were asked to try to start moving out of the 705 East University because of the odor issues. I think if anybody's been around, like Mr. Hopkins, probably was involved in some of those discussions years ago. The new plant that we built out there, I do not know of any odor issues we've had so far. We're sitting right next to a garbage facility, landscape, or a shingle, a railroad, a foundry, a recycling yard. And what we have done on the 4 large tanks we have out there right now, we have installed, exceeded the industry standards by putting vents, conservation vents on those tanks, bringing them down to ground level. Those tanks are static 95% of the time, meaning that if we aren't pumping into them or taking out, there is nothing coming out of those tanks for odor or vapors. And when we are pumping into them, those conservation vents are actually going into a tote, and we're collecting the vapors and the residue coming off those tanks. So we think that we have not had issues out there. Of course, we all know we have had issues here. That's why we're trying to move this facility. I think it's important that all of you know this phase 2, phase 1, we moved over 33% of our business to Saline Court. That was our hot oil business back in 2005. This phase will move another 25 to 30% of the business, which is also the polymer business, which is the exceedingly hot asphalt to that location. That will represent almost 2,000 trucks per year that's not going to be coming into the university facility. We're going to shut the rail down over on University, which is another, in some years, 300 to 400 rail cars that we've been unloading over there. So we're moving a large percentage, over 50% of our business, to Saline Court. Our plan, and nobody has asked, I figured you would ask, our plan is, in the next 5 to 10 years, to move the rest of the plant out to there, which will be the emulsion phase. That is another 50,000 ton. Depending upon the financial situation of the state and what we're able to do financially, we will move that. Our plan is to move the whole plant over there in the wishes of the city from 15 years ago. We're trying to do what you people wanted us to do. It is a heavy industrial area. So is there odor? There's always odor with asphalt. I've come up here before, but we're trying to exceed what we need to do. to keep that down. We don't want the smell either. So we're trying to be as good neighbors as possible. We talk about the berm. If any of you have been out there, we have planted, in the first committee, wanted us to put over trees and berms up there. We have planted over 100 trees out there that are now 15, 20 feet tall. We've maintained that area. If you go out there, I think ours looks better than the surrounding areas. Let me just put it that way. I'm not criticizing them. I don't care about them. But we have tried to maintain that area. So I can assure you that we are going to spend our money at Saline rather than trying to renovate and the university court. We're going to keep it up to safety standards. We're going to keep it as well as we can, but we do not want to spend large amounts of money at 705 East University simply because of location. So, does anybody else have any other questions? I mean, I'll be glad to answer them all if you got any other questions of our plans.
I don't think so. I thank you very much.
Yes,
Yeah.
thank you. You want me to sign that?
Sure, for the minutes, yeah, so she won't have to guess how to spell your name. Okay, any further discussion? Yep.
Okay. So I move we send plan case 2363 SU 18 to the city council with a recommendation of approval.
With the revised conditions.
Yes.
Great. Motion by Mr. Hopkins,
I'll second.
second by Mr. Turner. Any further discussion? Can we have a roll call when you're ready?
Mr. Fell? Mr. Fitch?
Yes.
Mr. Hopkins? Mr. Turner?
Yes.
Ms. Yu?
Yes.
And Ms. Bilden?
Yes.
That motion's approved. Are we also looking at
January.
January?
22nd, yeah.
January 22nd for the city council. Thank you, gentlemen. All right. Final case of the evening, a request by the city for a special use permit to allow the installation, operation, and maintenance of a solar energy system, approximately 41 acres, generally located near 901 North Smith Road in the AG zoning district. Mr. Ricci.
Good evening. Okay. So, the City of Urbana is requesting a special use permit to allow SunPower Corporation to construct, operate, and maintain an approximately 40-acre solar energy system. The city owns the closed landfill located at 901 North Smith Road, and the city and SunPower Corporation have entered into an agreement giving the company the option to lease all or part of the property to construct, operate, and maintain a distributed energy ballasted fixed tilt ground-mounted solar energy system at the site. The zoning administrator has determined that the proposed use of the site is subject to the regulations applicable to an electrical substation, which is permitted with a special use permit in the agriculture zoning district. The legal description for the original subject property was for 3 parcels. The site plan was subsequently revised after the staff report went out, which shifted the boundaries of the array to the east, keeping it on the 2 easternmost parcels. Actually, it is shown properly in the exhibits that you received. Exhibit A shows the 2 parcels here on the east side of the complex. It is a 40-acre project which would be contained within those 2 parcels. It is located between East Perkins Road and Smith and Barr Roads, and also between I-74 and the Saline Branch Drainage Ditch, which is this blue line here. This is a portion of the closed municipal landfill complex, which was closed in 1988. There's on the proposed site plan, which has been submitted and was part of the application, there's approximately 550 feet between the closest electrical inverter and the closest house, which is down here at the corner of Smith and Barr in Chief Illini Mobile Home Park. There is 280 feet between the solar array fence and the nearest house, which is this residence to the east. And there's approximately 760 feet between the solar array fence and saline drainage ditch to the northwest. Looking at the zoning of the site, there is agriculture to the north here on the same parcels, as well as to the north in the county, which is the brown ag, and also agriculture to the east across I-74, and as well as directly to the east where there is that single-family residence. There is industrial to the south, as well as multifamily to the southeast and to the southwest, and manufactured home park zoning to the south. These are in the county, but we still, acknowledge that they're there and what their zoning and land use is. This is Cottage Estates Mobile Home Park here, and this is the Chief Illini Mobile Home Park. This is actually currently agricultural land here to the south, but there is a contractor shop that's built there, and the remainder of the land is still being farmed, but it is zoned industrial, and it is moving towards that way. To the west is city ag land, and that's the site of the Landscape Recycling Center, as well as there are some other operations there. Public Works has a material storage area. The police has a firing range, and the fire department has a training range out there as well. Looking at some satellite pictures from Google, this is looking in from the south. The solar array would be in this general area here. This is the Arbor Division for the city. To this lower right hand of the page is where Chief Illini Mobile Home Park is. This, which is showing as farmland, there's actually now a contractor shop there. And then the Landscape Recycling Center is to the west. If you'll note, pretty much the entire south line and the east line and the northeast line and the north line are fairly heavily wooded. As well, it's harder to see, but this is a hilly area. It rises about 30 feet up. When you're standing down here at the street, it's very difficult to actually see the top of the hill due to the slope as well as the trees. And the array would be located on the opposite side of the trees. Even coming down I-74, you can't really see into the currently closed landfill area. This is looking at the site from the east. Here, the solar array would be in this area here. Here are a few gaps in the trees along I-74. And this is the wood line along between the single-family residence here. This is a garage there, and this is the wood line in between those two land uses. This is down on Barr Road at that garage for the residents directly to the east of the property. You can see the density of the wood line there between this residential use and the landfill on the other side. This is looking down Barr Road. This is the wood line along the closed landfill property. This is the north line of the mobile home park and the mobile homes there. And down at the end it turns south, and the Arbor Division is down there. This is looking east down Barr Road from the intersection where the Arbor Division is off here to the left. Looking at the comprehensive land use plan, you can see that this entire area is designated for future industrial land use. To the south, which is in the county, recognizes and assumes that the multifamily residential would continue down there to the south. And to the northeast is rural residential in the county as well as in the city, and to the northwest is designated for park use in the future. So let's see. The proposed solar energy system would cover approximately 40 acres and include approximately 15,000 solar panels in 8-foot-long strings and arranged in 3 arrays, A, B, and C, divided by an access path. These 2 groupings would each have individual fences around them, 8-foot fences. It's hard to see, but there's a green line that shows the bounds of the fence. That way somebody who has access to the Arbor Division property can pass all the way through without going into the secured area. There are 3 pairs of inverters with transformers. They're located here, here, and here next to the parking areas. As you can see, they are about as in the center of the property and away from the property lines as you can get. The one next to the fence here is right next to the Landscape Recycling Center, so that is also an attempt to stay away from the residential properties to the southeast. And the proposed solar energy system is designed to produce approximately 5.5 megawatts of electricity. Due to similar characteristics, the zoning administrator determined that the proposed system is most similar to and subject to the regulations applicable to an electrical substation, which is permitted in an ag district. The 2 nearby substations to here, Rising Sun and the one at Sydney, measure approximately 15 and 18 acres. So although they're a little smaller than this, the structures there are taller, and it is the most similar use that's covered in our zoning ordinances table of uses. As the proposal is to treat this as an electrical substation, it would be required to meet the same requirements, which would include the minimum lot configurations and required yards of an electrical substation. Although screening would not be required, the majority of the project site is visually and aurally screened by the existing wood line as well as the slope of the hill. Glare from the panels should be minimal, as the pebbled surface of the solar panels is designed to absorb light, not reflect it, and the solar array is at least 760 feet from the saline drainage ditch, which was a concern of members of the City Council during their hearings for the lease agreement, which was approved by City Council. The ballast mounting installation method will allow the site to be decommissioned and returned to its current condition with minimal permanent damage. There aren't any penetrations of posts into the ground. It's actually the panels are mounted to large chunks of concrete which simply rest on top of the ground surface. Construction and operation of the site would be regulated by existing city and state codes, including noise, which would be regulated by Chapter 16, Noise and Vibrations of the city's Code of Ordinances. Vegetation management would be regulated by Chapter 25, Vegetation of the city's code, including nuisance vegetation and maximum height. In addition, the proposed solar energy system would conform to all applicable regulations and standards. The applicant and their developer will share some examples of similar projects the developer has already completed. According to Section 7.4a of the zoning ordinance, an application for a special use permit must demonstrate 3 criteria. First, the proposed solar energy system is conducive to the public convenience at the proposed location in 2 primary ways. That the proposed system would redevelop approximately 40 acres of a closed municipal landfill, which would otherwise have very little opportunity for reuse. And it would also, due to the proximity to the interstate would allow easy access for construction materials and labor as well as maintenance. Second, that the proposed system is designed, located, and will be operated as to minimize unreasonably injurious and detrimental impacts to the public, including not blocking roads, handling any waste generated, managing vegetation, securing the array site with fences, and complying with noise regulations. And finally, that the proposed system would conform to the applicable regulations and standards of the Ag District and would not be out of character with the Ag District. As it will not require extension or expansion of any city infrastructure, installation and operation should have minimal impact on the natural and built environments, and the project site should be able to be restored to its current condition with minimal permanent damage. The redevelopment of the subject property with the proposed system would be beneficial to the city and meet the criteria for special use permit approval. The Plan Commission is required to make a recommendation to City Council for or against the proposed special uses and may also recommend such additional conditions as are appropriate for the public health, safety, and welfare. This is from the application, which shows an elevation shot of the solar panel, the post connected to the concrete block, and one of the converter boxes. The staff recommends that Plan Commission recommend approval of the proposed special use permit with the following conditions. The typical one is that the use generally conforms to the site plan submitted in the application, including a minimum 500-foot buffer to the saline drainage ditch, which it does currently, except where modified to meet city regulations. And secondly, that the solar energy system structures would be limited to a maximum 15 foot in height. Although the current plan is that they would only be 8 foot tall, this increase in height would allow for changes in future technology that might benefit the array to be more productive with a taller system. I would point out that principal structures in an ag district are actually allowed to be 35 feet tall. We don't recommend that these structures be permitted to be that tall, and staff feels that 15 foot is a reasonable compromise between the current proposed 8 and the 35 typically allowed. And the summary of findings in the staff report are listed. A special note is that the proposed use is conducive to the public convenience at that location because it would redevelop the closed municipal landfill, and the proposed use is designed so that it will not be unreasonably injurious to the ag district, and that the character of the ag district would be preserved with the proposed use because installation and operation will have minimal impact on the natural and built environments. The Plan Commission has the following options: to recommend approval of the special use permit without any additional conditions, to recommend approval of the permit with any conditions deemed appropriate, or to recommend denial of the special use permit. If the Plan Commission elects to deny, it should articulate the findings supporting the denial. That is the end of the presentation. I'm here for questions. Mr. Scott Test, the city's sustainability manager, is here as the applicant, as well as Chad Tatey is on the phone from SunPower Corporation and is available to answer any questions. They do have a presentation that they would like to give.
Great, thank you, Mr. Ricci. Any questions? Mr. Fell?
I think you meant this and you kind of talked around it, but I don't want to hear you actually say it.
Okay.
When this thing is obsolete and they no longer want to operate it, they have to take it away.
That is correct. There is
Okay.
a decommissioning section in the lease that has already been approved by City Council.
Okay, thank you.
Any further questions? I have a couple of questions. We just twice have continued a zoning text amendment change relating to solar energy system installation.
Yes.
I'm just wondering about the order of calling this a substation when we could have considered a text amendment and added solar to this either as a special use or whatever to the ag district.
Right.
So I'm just curious about the timing.
The timing is to deal with, the developer would like to apply for financial incentives from the state to build this development. There is a deadline that was originally January 29th to get all permits to be able to get those financial incentives. That deadline has been pushed back to February 13th. As you are probably aware, writing a zoning text amendment for for large-scale solar arrays is very
It's a complex
difficult
endeavor, yeah.
and complex, and
So you're not ready for that?
correct.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
And this particular proposal is conducive to, I think, the special use permit option, because the property is currently owned and will continue to be owned by the city. It is in an agricultural district. It's kind of it's a very well-defined project.
Right. Well, my second question, which is related, is why are we not considering whether to zone it to industrial, which is essentially what the plan calls for, in which case a substation would be permitted by right.
I don't think there's any necessary reason to rezone it if it can be done with a special use permit in its current zoning.
Okay. The other question I had was about access. We
Yes.
had a case on this with the construction material place, and at that time, I didn't think that private road, if anybody remember that case, I didn't think that private road was available as an entry point to, at least to the parcel that would be, I guess, to the south, which is where the construction shed is. And at that time, I don't think we have any residents here today, but we had some residents of the nearby properties that talked about the difficult conditions on Barr Road and especially Smith Road. But the main access point is off of a private drive. Is that correct?
I would leave it to Mr. Tess or Mr. Tatey to speak about where they would be bringing construction materials in from.
Okay. But I just want to know, can they get there from Smith Road?
They could technically come up off
It
of...
looks like they can.
Yes.
Yeah.
I drove that,
Yeah, right.
last week. You have to take this long,
All
winding
the way
thing.
around the
Right.
shed. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
There is also a road up to the north, Perkins Road,
Yeah.
comes down, that then accesses the, up here. I'm not sure what it would take to get all the way up to Perkins and come off there and come in from the north.
I was just wondering if the private drive became unavailable,
Right.
how would they get onto the property?
I will leave that for the developer
Yeah.
or the applicant to answer.
Any further questions? Okay, thank you. All right. Well, if the applicant petitioner would wish to address the commission at this time?
Good evening. I'm Scott Tess. I'm the Environmental Sustainability Manager for the City of Urbana. I've brought this project to the city through a competitive qualifications-based selection. We selected SunPower to partner with. We're very excited about the possibility, the opportunity to redevelop a brownfield that has no other foreseeable use into a renewable energy asset. So we have Chad Tatey with SunPower on the phone. He's been listening to the meeting so far, and I'm going to turn it over to him to go through a few slides, and of course I'll be here to answer any questions you have, and at some point we'll get to
Okay, great.
your
Thank
question
you.
as well. Chad, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yep, sure can.
Okay, good, okay. Well, thank you, Scott, and thanks, Mr. Ricci, for giving this nice introduction, and thank you to the Plan Commission for the opportunity to address the group tonight. I just wanted to give a better sense of the project and a better description from our perspective, and then share with you a couple of references. So I think there are a few slides. I'm not sure if you see them.
Yep,
We do.
we're on the cover
This is
slide
cool.
right now. I'll advance them at your request.
Do you see the slides now? There's just a little delay from the video to the audio here. Are you still able to hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So let me just first describe the system. I'm looking at a slide now that is called Preliminary System Design. So this is an overview of our system as we see it now at a preliminary stage. And Mr. Ricci nicely described this, but maybe a little more detail here is that this is a 6.7 megawatt DC system. It does have about 15,000 modules. This is a ballasted system, which means there's no penetrations into the ground as not to disturb the cap of the landfill. And this is a fixed tilt, which means there's no moving parts. So it's a fixed tilt at 20 degrees. And as was mentioned, it has an approximate height from the surface to the tip of the highest point of the array of 8 feet. Also, this was mentioned, but there will be 3 inverter stations. These inverter stations were strategically located towards the center of the site to minimize any noise that could be heard. And also included in the project is an 8-foot high fence designed to fully enclose the arrays and would also permit an access road through the entire site that gives the city access for continued O&M on the site and access. So there's also in the next slide just an illustration. This was shown earlier, but just gives you a sense of what it would look like at an elevation view. Again, illustrating a 20-degree tilt of a fixed tilt system where there'd be 2 modules in portrait configuration. And then I just wanted to give you a sense of who SunPower is that could also go along with the system design and who would be operating it. There's a slide here about SunPower, and I'll just mention 3 brief things. First, SunPower is a very experienced firm with over 33 years of operations, and we're headquartered in the U.S. Second component to this is that we have the most proven technology. We're manufacturing our own modules, which will be used on this site, and they're very high-performing, efficient modules compared to traditional modules. And the last piece is that we are a strong long-term partner with a high focus on safety, and also our ownership in a large firm, a large oil and gas firm, helps the stability of the organization. That's Total. Without spending much more time, I've got a couple of reference slides here of projects that are relevant. The first project is Exelon Generation. This is a brownfield site that was installed in the city of Chicago and the West Pullman neighborhood. It was installed back in 2010, so it's been operating for a number of years. It's a 10-megawatt system. This one is a ground mount as well, but it's a tracking system, so it has moving parts. It tracks the sun. And it's approximately 35 acres. The system is owned and operated by Exelon, and we continue to provide O&M services and support to the project. And this project generates about 14,000 megawatt hours annually. So that's equivalent to about 1,500 homes are receiving power from a project like that. And the next project I wanted to share with you is a landfill project it's in Riverside, California. This one is installed on a public agency's land. It's Riverside Public Utilities, and they're a landfill that is also capped and owned by the public agency. It's a 9.4 megawatt system. That's a DC number, approximately 50 acres, and this one is a ground fixed tilt. So it's similar to the one being proposed in the preliminary design for the Urbana landfill. And this one was also installed in 2015, so it's been operational for several years. And this system is powering producing enough electricity for about 1,600 homes. So that really concludes all I have to share, and happy to answer any questions.
Great, thank you. Any questions for the applicant? Mr. Fell?
I think sort of a technical question, but what's the wind speed required to move one of these things?
There's a rating for the mounting system. I don't have that in front of me. Typically, a minimum threshold that we have are in most projects that I've experienced is 110 mile an hour wind speed they're designed for. A fixed tilt could have something more robust than that, but often what we observe is 110 miles per hour wind speed is what we've satisfied. But for this specific design, I can provide that.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Turner?
I was curious, what's the expected lifespan of this facility?
So the system, the modules have a useful life of over 30 years, as well as the mounting system. The term of the solar system would be under a power purchase agreement, and that term may be anywhere from 15 to 25 years, likely be a 15 or 20-year term.
So an important point along those lines, when Chad says that the modules have a useful life of 30 years, they don't go to zero production at 30 years. They decline in production over time. And so they have continual use value, simply a renegotiation as to whether the partners want to continue along the same lines of a new agreement or decommission the site. The lease option and lease are set up to decommission the site with the possibility of renegotiation for an extension.
Mr. Hopkins?
What's the length of the lease agreement?
My recollection is that we're looking at a 25-year agreement with an optional 5-year extension.
Further questions? Ms. Billman?
How many homes can be powered by this?
So this system, with the 6.7 megawatts of capacity, has an expected production in year one of 9,700,000 kilowatt hours, and it's approximately. Hold on, I can. Sorry, I'd like to follow up on that question. I just don't want to tell you a number and be off.
Just generally, some of these others said that you showed us said like 1,600 homes. Wondered what it was for this one.
It would be about 1,100 homes a year, and that's a rough number, and it would also depend on installing all this capacity, which is anticipated. So it would be expected about 1,100 homes could be powered from the system.
Great. Any further questions? Mr. Turner?
I'm just curious, how long would it take to install all of these? What's the timeline?
The timeline to install the actual mechanical erection goes pretty fast. The system itself, we would have a lot of work that would happen initially with due diligence and design, but the actual steel erection and foundations, which are the ballasting, 3 to 4 months, approximate installation period.
Further questions?
And we didn't get to your question
About the access?
Yeah.
Mr. Ricci kind of did. I mean, I just wanted to make sure that there was more than one, there was another way to get in there other than the private drive, because I thought there was an issue in the earlier case with that private drive.
So,
I thought maybe Flexingate owns it or somebody?
well, there's access. You can see at the north side of this image, the white line is a gravel road.
Okay, yeah, I didn't go
That's
over
all
it.
the way from the Landscape Recycling Center and its access point.
Great.
So that's one. The other access is Smith Road to the south here, next to the Arbor Division's shop. So those are both access points for the
Great.
property.
Great.
I guess I just wanted to clarify that Smith Road is public, so.
Correct.
They could
Right,
come
right.
in that way.
Absolutely, yeah. I remember that from earlier. But there was some issue with that private drive in the other case, so I can't remember what it was. But, all right, anything else? Thank you very much. Thank you on the phone.
Thank you.
Anybody else wish to address the Plan Commission on this case? No? In that case, I'll close the public input portion and we'll go into discussion. Any discussion? Mr. Fell?
I'm going back to my point of what it takes to move one of these things.
Yeah, when?
Building code is 90 miles an hour here. If these things can't withstand a 90-mile-an-hour wind without either,
Said 110.
no, he said the ones in the ground are 110. He didn't know about these that are sitting on concrete.
Oh, okay.
And my fear is, I mean, we have to design to a 90-mile-an-hour wind. If these can't do 90 miles an hour, I'm not comfortable with that because we're sitting right next to the interstate. And if one of these things blows off, it's probably going to blow into my house. And I mean, it may seem trivial, but we don't need a 90-mile-an-hour wind to blow a semi off the road or to blow a train off a track. So,
Ms. Pearson?
I'm looking at the specifications page, which is an Exhibit D application, so I'm not going to pretend I'm an expert. However, under compliance, at the bottom, the last row, it says wind/snow load, 139.8 miles per hour, and then it gives some code reference.
okay, then I'm good with that.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you. Further discussion? Motions?
Somebody else has to learn how to do it.
I agree. I agree.
I will move that the forward plan case number 2365-SU-18 to the City Council with recommendation for approval.
Motion by Mr. Fell. Second by Mr. Hopkins. Thank you. Any further discussion? In that case, if we could have a roll call vote.
Mr. Fitch,
Yes.
Mr. Hopkins,
Yes.
Mr. Turner,
Yes.
Ms. Yu,
Yes.
Ms. Billman. Yes. And Mr. Fell.
Yes.
Motion's approved. Mr. Ricci, are we also looking at January 22nd? It's going to be a big night. I appreciate it. We don't have any new business tonight. Anyone wish to address the Plan Commission on a topic germane to planning? Do we have a staff report?
No.
We do not have a staff report. We do not have a study session. Therefore, we're adjourned. Thank you very much.